he uses this term. This will be the one time I do this. Will you repeat this with me just so we can all use, because we're going to use this term a lot in our conversation. Will you say, it's a handful, the narrative of racial difference?
The narrative of racial difference.
Thanks, yeah. So here, he uses this to describe the construct of race and to delineate this from the conversation on diversity and inclusion, right? So the narrative of racial difference is this. So race is a human-made system, right? So whereas ethnicity and culture and nationality have been around for as long as human beings have, race, relatively speaking, is a young system. You know, a lot of people who study would say it's 400 years old or less. And again, I realize for many I'm preaching to the choir, but let me just create some vocabulary here. So race built these social categories, all right, off of perceived differences physically, which science debunked long ago that's not based on scientific biological difference, but there's these perceived differences that racial differences get recognized, which that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem, this is where Stevenson's term becomes important. The biggest problem is that there's a narrative that went with the recognition of racial differences. There was a story that created a racial hierarchy. It said all human beings are not created equal. That's at the foundation of the system of race, is this belief all human beings are not created equal. There's different levels of intelligence, different levels of capacity, different danger levels, different proclivities towards violence. Like there's these stories that went with the creation of race, and that's the narrative of racial difference. This is a very typical response, and those of you who've led these conversations in white spaces, you hear this oftentimes. You know, a lot of white folks will often say, well, okay, slavery was terrible, and I can acknowledge slavery was terrible, right? But I didn't own slaves. My forefathers didn't own slaves. What does that have to do with today? And so last kind of idea on this, and then we can move to what's next, Jeff. Okay. So Stevenson helps us to see you can't really deal with the system stuff without also dealing with the narrative. So to say a different way, the narrative, the story, it's in the soil of the fabric of what our society systems have been built on. And so if there's this story in the soil that says there's a racial hierarchy, that human value is tied to where somebody falls on this racial hierarchy, well, then systems get built on top of that. And the systems have to be confronted. There's no question about that, right? So in 1865, slavery got overturned, and it's important it did, right? That's not insignificant. But if the system was built on the narrative in the soil, if you knock over the system but don't get to the roots, right? Anybody who gardens knows what happens if you pull a weed up at the top and don't get to the root. It will always come back.